Say to everyone, welcome again. This is a joint effort of UpWest and Google for Startups. We've been doing this since April and had some really incredible people coming on, sharing with us a lot of insights, both about go-to-market opportunities, different sectors to look forward to, seed strategies for raising money for early stage founders, insights from various tech executives and entrepreneurs about the do's and don'ts during COVID times. And we just, are incredibly happy to, continue and share a lot of our insights from the work that we do with founders, as well as bring our network of experts into this. And I'm really excited that we have today one of those experts. So meanwhile, while people are joining, I wanted to briefly talk about UpWest, what we do. My name is Shuly Galili. I'm a founding partner of UpWest. We've been around since 2012. Investing in Israeli founders and entrepreneurs who are on the path to their US market and helping them with anything that they need in order to scale successfully in the US. We write first checks for all of these startups and happy to be along the journey for them as they continue and grow here. Again, as I mentioned, for this session, again, we are joining with Google for Startups. And we have here today Inbal Perlman, who is heading Google for Startups in Tel Aviv. And
Hi,
Inbal. Thanks again for joining us. Here we are. It's been a while for me, but I'm always happy to be here and excited to connect again. So I'll let you talk about Google for Startups.
Thank you, Shuly. And like you said, this is a partnership already feeling like we've been doing this for 2 years because COVID feels like it's been around for 2 years. So as always, we're excited for this session. So Google for Startups, if anyone here is not familiar, we support early stage founders, bringing the best of Google, any sort of mentoring, Google programs, everything is happening online. And if you're interested to learn more, you can check the website. As always, all the information and the recordings are there. And I'll just say that these are usually the sessions because it's around evening time here where, I can tell, my boyfriend's in the other room. I say, okay, now I'm in this session. This is like the prime of all the sessions that we do. And we get really excited to hear the different speakers coming from the Valley. So this is like the cherry on the cake, I think, of webinars for all of us. So thank you and enjoy. This mic is yours.
Thank you so much. Great partnership, and we look forward for our future sessions. But for today's session, I'm really excited to have Yousuf Khan, who's a partner at Ridge Ventures, and he's been on our list of guests for a long time. So I'm really excited to finally be able to have Yousuf, who's actually not, a neighbor not far from me, apparently. But, here we are, all of us on virtually meeting and virtually talking about a lot of things. The reason I was really excited about hosting Yousuf is, we've had a session previously with a career CIO, Alan Bain, and it was really insightful, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs trying to go to market and get on board a first customer. And today's session, getting enterprise ready is really, I think, a remarkable opportunity for a lot of entrepreneurs who are in the enterprise space to understand from Yousuf a lot of the insights that he has had in his long career. So he spent 20 years as an operator, both as CIO and CISO and large enterprises, companies such as Pure Storage and Automation Anywhere, where he spent his time being first customer and first design partner to many early stage enterprise startups. And so much of those insights, I think, are extremely valuable for founders today who are trying to get to their first customer here in the US. So Yousuf's involvement with entrepreneurs and startups over the years, led him to be advisor to some really remarkable startups early on, and mentoring them, obviously, about their go-to-market and getting to enterprises early. And that led to a natural path and transition to become an early stage VC. So recently he joined as partner at Ridge Ventures, which is an early stage fund here in Silicon Valley. And it allows him to continue his journey alongside early stage founders. So Yousuf, the first question for me to you is, I wanted to know kind of the journey to venture. And you spent 20 years as an operator and did a lot of great work in large enterprises and as IT leader. What made you decide to embark on the VC path? And also talk to us a little bit about, what this path is going to be like for you in terms of stages you're going to invest in, spaces, and what Ridge is doing these days.
Yeah, well, so first of all, thank you, Shuly. Thank you to Google for Startups and UpWest for hosting. Really both honored and very excited to talk today. Yeah, look, I think it's been a very interesting journey for me. I'd say character building is probably a good way to describe it. I've been an operator for several years as a CIO and CISO. Part of that journey allowed me to work with a lot of startups at early stages. I fundamentally believe that to be able to innovate at scale, you have to really work with, I believe, innovation type companies who are able to actually focus on problems that you care about and are not addressed by existing providers. And so that was a motivation to work with startups. The second part was company building is really hard. And most people just forget that, kind of romanticize about these articles you hear in the press about fundraising, et cetera, but actually building a company of meaningful value and employing and taking a product to market is really hard. And so I sort of feel that, found that it was an opportunity for me to be able to really be able to give feedback and guidance where I could. And so in being able to work with startups at early stages, I was an early employee of MoveWorks, which was my other major startup journey. It was a tremendous opportunity to learn about deploying out AI and machine learning solutions at scale for enterprise companies. So I've been on the operator side as well as on the startup side. And a large part of that is being able to join a VC firm which invests in late seed and Series A enterprise companies. Ridge has been around for several years, has backed companies like Fastly and Crux and others. And so the objective was really to find the next generation of companies and to be able to use my operator vantage point to be able to guide them from a go-to-market standpoint, and then be able to be perfectly honest, give some candid feedback, because I think some people and some companies lack that as they go to market. And so hoping to be able to provide that in a constructive way as someone who's bought hundreds of solutions and sold solutions in the past may be of some use. And candidly speaking, I'm very passionate about it. I just believe that the economy that we live in and work in is going to be driven by innovation. It's going to be driven by creativity. And I believe that possibility is now more than ever before. And so I would love to be playing my small part in that. So yeah.
Fantastic. Great.
Plus I get to hang out with people like Shuly. So that's kind of cool. So I'm very happy about that really as well.
Our talk today is about being enterprise ready for early stage founders. And this is something that, we've been seeing a lot of founders very early stage when we invest, trying to understand, what does it mean? So it means a lot of things to a lot of founders. What does it mean for a CIO or a CISO when they meet a startup, whether or not they're enterprise ready? What are those kind of checklists, if you will, that you can provide us when we talk about it?
Sure. So I think one thing I would say right off the bat, it's a very long checklist. And not every startup is going to be able to do that. So let's be realistic about that. But there's certain things at the core of a startup working with an enterprise company or with any company to be able to demonstrate their enterprise ready. And that's really about the foundation. As I tend to basically say, houses are built on good foundation. And I think The house itself, the design of it could be questionable in terms of what it looks like and how it feels and but the structure needs to be absolutely solid. And that's kind of how you need to think about enterprise readiness. A few things that immediately come to mind is really comes down to thinks about the product vision and if it's actually addressing a problem that the CIO cares about. And I know that sounds very basic, but most people forget about the fact that problems are not fixed in time. They grow over time. And so therefore, the second piece of that is, are you building a product that has long-term meaningful value? And I think that's the thing that really impresses companies to think about being enterprise grade, which is being there for the longer term. If you think about enterprise products, they've been there for several years. You don't tend to rip them out. And so you've got to think about how you build your product, the level of stickiness and usage that sort of goes into that. The third thing that goes in is really about user experience. Most people don't think about this too much. They think about engineering in a way to say solving a problem. But the product is used by human beings who are not in the cybersecurity world. They're not in the data infrastructure world. They are receivers and recipients of this technology. And so therefore, their ability to use the product and solution needs to be best in class. I think foundationally, cybersecurity now is table stakes, simply because data, privacy, compliance, cybersecurity, all of these things are top of mind for CIOs. The reason for that is very simple. A lot of CIOs don't have a CISO partner. Cybersecurity talent acquisition is exceptionally hard. And so being able to own security, even at the corporate IT side, is really critical for a CIO. And so fundamentally, they're going to be thinking about how a startup addresses and how it's built from a cybersecurity standpoint. I think the last thing is actually, you forget about the business relationship. There's a lot of startups who come in and say, well, we've built this phenomenal product and we've got this great website. But actually, fundamentally, you're going into a transactional business relationship. Who is on your board? How are you funded? Are you going to basically stay the course? What is your vision? Candidly speaking, how do you engage with customers? Now, there are a number of solutions which do not have sales functions. Those are far and few between, in my vantage point. But the true enterprise grade solutions have a customer experience standpoint to them, where a sales team and it requires to sell to a CIO's direct reports. There's executive alignment between a C-suite at the company as well as with the CIO, for example. So all of these things start to sort of come into place. And the other thing you need to understand is CIOs need to be able to represent and advocate these sort of risky investments, right? So how do you basically, how are you able to justify that? And how are you able to sell it to yourself as a CIO to be able to make it ready? So these are some of the things at the core that come top of mind for a CIO when they want to think about sort of working with enterprise grade startups and whether they're enterprise ready.
That's great. And I think, a lot of startups are thinking, when is the right time? Because, is it okay to talk to CIOs before you actually, presenting to them, any kind of solution? What was your experience in people who did it right versus people who did it wrong in the timing, as well as, the process that, they went through engaging with you when you were in that role? Right.
So, probably the most important piece about this is that timing may be everything, but to a certain extent, it's kind of irrelevant. And let me tell you why that is. Fundamentally, if you're thinking about yourself as a company that's going to be building a company of scale and meaningful value, the question comes down to is those first 10 customers, those first 5 customers are critical as part of your journey. And that fundamentally means you have to figure out multiple ways to be able to engage with them and for them to be able to buy into your vision. I mean, you haven't even created a full product. So you're asking for something very, very unnatural. Let's be candid. And with that in mind, it's very much a relationship built a relationship that needs to be built very early on. And I think it varies from CIO to CIO. I am, candidly speaking, the weirdo CIO in the Bay Area. There's multiple reasons for that. I'm totally fine. I talk with companies at early stages, even when a founder is looking to incubate their idea. I did this before I became a VC, because they wanted feedback on what the problem statement was. So I think engaging early is better. And candidly speaking, the worst that's going to happen is that you don't get a response or someone says no. Is that really such a bad thing? I mean, there's worse things in the world that happen from that standpoint. So my first piece of advice is engage early. Number two is identify who those customers are from a footprint standpoint. You should be able to come up with some sort of raw intelligence about a company in terms of their what they typically buy or what their technical stack is. Are they a good customer fit? A lot of startups make the mistake. They're like, as long as we get in touch with these 5 CIOs, we'll be absolutely fine. That's not necessarily the case. If it's going to take you 9 months to deploy the product, even go through procurement, is that a good customer fit? Of course not. I'd rather basically that you work with companies which are probably forgiving, want to be able to engage, and are motivated by doing so. I think the other piece to this is the process is, in my viewpoint, very simple, and people tend to make this mistake. You don't always need to connect with the CIO. The CIOs tend to work with, teams, leadership teams that they have built over time. There's a very good reason for that. They want to delegate, and they want to be able to empower, and they also want to develop and grow their professionals in the team. And they do that by being able for them to own innovation projects. So being able to connect. So one of the things that people avoid, I really want to advise startups to get away from thinking that always selling. You've got nothing to sell. Your product is literally barely created. So you can't sell it, for one thing. So is there any harm for you to be able to reach out and say, we'd love to be able to get your feedback on it because we think this is a problem that exists. And would you be able to spare some time? I actually think there's a lot of people who would be a lot more open to that. And that's basically been proven because for the last few years, you hear about a lot of companies which, have gone public. And I was part of one where Pure Storage was built in 2009 at the height of the financial crisis. And the world wasn't thinking about a new data storage product, but it was a phenomenally, fundamentally great product with great architecture, great experience. And it got a bunch of early customers because it said, haven't you suffered issues in what you've bought in the past? Do you think this is a new way of looking at things? And it turns out there was an appetite for that. It was a very, very successfully fast-growing company. And so I think that's important. So I would summarize it. Number one is reach out and be active in doing it. Be thoughtful about it and think about what a good customer fit looks like. And we should talk about a little bit more about what that relationship is, but those are the things from a process standpoint.
Yes. And I think that, what I noticed is that founders, oftentimes wait too long before they, go and ask these critical questions from potential customers that can inform them so much about the problem they're trying to solve and whether or not there is appetite, as you said, out there. And qualifying those early customers is really key to a lot of founders in order to really understand whether or not they can and how quickly they can, deploy, or whether or not there's going to be a lot of feedback loop going on, between them and the potential customer that is out there. And also, identifying obviously expectations with, what successful pilot or early customer looks like. So we talked a little bit about that. What are the best ways for founders to reach out to once you qualify, the potential customers and design partners, and you say, that for sure I want to talk to these people. How do people reach out to you, and who right and who did it wrong, and were there any kind of ways that you see your colleagues, CIOs, that are doing it today?
So I'll let you in on a very, very big secret, and that is that the software industry is imperfect by its very nature. And by what I mean by that is your products are always being developed over time, so no one is expecting a perfect product. And if you expect that, that's the buyer mindset. People know that they're going to be growing and developing existing platforms, whether they're multi-million-dollar subscriptions or not, right? So it's important to have that mindset. And by that, I basically mean is when you're trying to reach out to CIOs, there's multiple ways to do it. And I think people need to accept that actually there's a lot of CIOs and IT teams who are very eager to work with startups at early stages. They just don't know what those opportunities look like, number one, and they don't actually know what the path looks like. So that's the other piece. So when you're actually having a conversation, walk them through what a design partnership looks like. Actually say, this is what we would expect. This is what we would be very grateful if you're able to spare the time. If I go back to in terms of the methods, I think there's a variety of them. Number one is, yes, you should be reaching out to people directly. I mean, it's just, like if you see someone who is active, either on LinkedIn or otherwise, you should basically be reaching out to them. Yes, there's going to be a high chance that they will probably reject it. But don't be sending them just a LinkedIn invite. Actually put some context in it. Just say, I'm an early stage founder. I would really love to be able to engage with you because I think you've spoken about a problem that we are looking to build towards. Could you spare 30 minutes to do it? The second is to be able to work with their teams and identify those as well. And I think that's important to be able to figure out the direct report. That's actually the best piece. The VPs and the directors of IT are probably the best sources of people to be able to speak with because they're the ones who are gatekeepers from that standpoint. Third, you should be working with your VC partners. And that's very, very important. There's a value add. Shuly, you're one of the most connected people I know, and I'm relatively well connected in the CIO community. And so you should be basically leveraging from those relationships. Fourth is actually use your network actively with a good level of context. And what I mean by that is you should basically be asking whether it's in your investors or, design partners or otherwise to be able to say, for example, if you secure 1 or 2 design partners, you should be saying to them, your peer group, who would you recommend that we should basically speak with? There's a lot of collaboration that goes into these communities and most people forget that. And you end up basically trying to pitch to literally a company and you find out that they are very close friends with one of your design partners. And if you actually had the time to basically make that ask, that they would have made the introduction anyway, and they'd be able to do that. I think the last thing is, I think part of it is actually creating collateral to be able to do it, right? I think some people do a very basic thing of being able to provide, just a kind of a LinkedIn invite or a cold email. A lot of people reply to some of these emails. It's not entirely impossible for that to happen. But I do think that basically, if you're able to talk about a problem statement in a way that you've heard a CIO speak about it, and do it in a sensible way to talk about what you're building, my viewpoint is that CIO or member of the leadership team will typically respond to that. And the reason is because they've talked about it in the open. And I think that's kind of important to be able to point out. I think the most important piece is you've got to be able to say why they are a good fit. And I think you should be able to present that. How many times have I basically received an email? Actually, I'll give you an example. I was CIO of Pure Storage. Do you know how many companies called me up which offered me storage solutions? It was astonishing. And I was like, I have no idea why you think this is a good idea. It just blows my mind. I was like, I was CIO of Qualys. No shortage of companies which had slightly competing products, but because they were kind of just randomly looking, they didn't actually search and say, well, is this an actual good fit? With Pure Storage, it's literally in the domain name. I work for a company called Pure Storage. What do you think I do that would basically make me think that I would like to re-engage with you? Now, I'm not saying that in a joking way. It's just, people lack context. And I think that's one of the things that I think startups should definitely do a little bit more of, because they understand the company more. And that basically is something which people respond to in a much better way. Yeah.
I think, I want to spend some time on the engagement and the process itself. Like once you engage with a large enterprise and, it's a small startup, I think a lot of early stage founders kind of have a lot of concern about how they are perceived in front of this giant.
Yes.
And many of them will likely express, that they have more than they actually do, or how. Exactly. And it's, and I think that is, a lot of times, that kind of conversation and expectation is super important to set this, kind of this set the stage early in order for it to be like a successful engagement.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that a little bit more in terms of, how do you ensure it's a successful engagement between you and a first design partner you have as a founder?
Yeah, a couple of key things. I think Shakespeare once wrote, if you're true to yourselves, you'll never have to lie to anyone, right? And I think the important thing that I advocate very heavily on is transparency. The companies that have succeeded and done well are ones which are fundamentally transparent about who they are as a company, what they're building, and where they're heading towards. Be actually rigorous and diligent in being able to say what you do well and what you don't do well. And the thing that most people tend to forget is you should explain why you're not doing something. Like people actually understand that you're 5 people, sitting as a startup trying to basically revolutionize a particular industry. Like they get it. And as a result, they're not expecting you to basically have everything. So there's a lot of companies make this mistake by saying yes to a lot of stuff, which let's be candid, will probably take a lot longer than they would expect. So I've always advocated for companies to be as transparent as possible, to talk a little bit about their thinking. And I think people buy into that. And the reason for that is very simple. If you are a CIO, you're buying a solution, you're coming in from a very specific reference point. Because you're an operator, you're not building companies, you're deploying out products, you're deploying out solutions. So you have a certain way of thinking about, and therefore you're going to ask a question by saying, do you have this feature? Are you working on this? Because this is what I hear, this is what I need. And it may be because you're a startup, you're not building that. And there's a very good reason for it. Probably because, those integrations don't work, or you haven't seen it from the other customers you've been speaking to. Everyone is building legitimate products with a degree of thoughtfulness that goes into it. So having transparency is absolutely key. Second piece, outline what your vision looks like. So if you want to talk about readiness in terms of when you should be speaking, you should be being able to speak to a CIO with a degree of confidence, because you've thought about the company from a longer term. Most companies want to be able to build a product and get it out to market really fast without actually thinking about what the long-term impact of that product is within an enterprise. So being able to at least paint that vision. No one's asking it to be fixed. As I said earlier, software is imperfect by its very nature. It will be improved upon and built upon over time. People expect that to happen. People live and breathe that. And so, including CIOs. And so the other part of the design process is being able to outline what that vision looks like. Third, think about the success metrics that go in with a design partnership. What's going to work well? What isn't going to work well? And being able to outline that. For example, you should be stating, we expect in the first month to do these key things, and this is why we're doing them, and people will be engaged. Fourth, probably the most importantly, you should talk about what the commitment is required and be very direct about that. Just say, look, this is a design partnership. We're an early stage company. We're building a product that we think is a fundamental value to you, and it will be really beneficial to you in many, many ways. And as a result of that, our viewpoint is we need you to be able to give us feedback at these checkpoints to be able to do it. Fifth, and probably most importantly, and most startups make this mistake, they don't do executive alignment early enough. And what that basically means is you need to be able to make sure that you can say, can I speak to the most senior person in the organization? It doesn't always have to be the CIO, by the way. Sometimes it's about who the executive sponsor is in that organization, who's basically kept up to date on what that. So Moveworks did this really well. Bhavin Shah was the CEO of the company when I was the first design partner. He made it a point to be able to check in with me every month, and sometimes be able to drive that forward every 6 weeks, and to be able to keep me up to date. I was involved at the very early stages, but I've got 300 other priorities that are going into place. And he did that super well. Number of companies, that's you try and do that alignment, therefore everybody's up to date. And so therefore you don't have any surprises. The things that CIOs absolutely really despise is being, surprised at being dropped on them, because something was promised them in the 6-month pitch when they first met this company at a VC's event, and now it's completely different from where it stands. And so that's a mistake that you want to do. So you want to have, there's a relationship piece that goes into it. There's a communication piece that goes into it. And there's, of course, the execution piece is clear. Talk about the problems early. When you talk about the problems early, that's when you start to address, because there's so much learning that goes into that. For example, when you're deploying out a product into, for example, and you've done supremely well by investing in companies like Psycognito and others on the cybersecurity side. If you think about that, they're going into existing infrastructures which have been around for many, many years. And they've been configured and built and customized to cater to that customer environment. And here comes a cybersecurity company or a DevOps company like Aspecto, and they're basically trying to, really be able to come into this environment. That requires a bit of change on their side. Walk them through that. Tell them what that journey is and tell them why. Explain how what you've done for a certain while. It's not about being insulting any. It's actually being able to say, the optimal way to be able to do this at scale requires you to make these X many changes. Are you willing to do that? And at least have that conversation up front versus trying to work your way around it. You'd be very surprised about that. So quite a bit there, but I hope that's at least helpful.
Yeah. What happens when, you are on a certain journey to build a product, that will hopefully fit multiple customers, and the CIO comes and says, but I want you to build something a little bit more unique for us, and maybe that's not on the roadmap. Maybe it's not a direction that you were going to go as a founder. What do you do, and how do you maybe move around it?
Yeah, look, if I was a founder, I'm not brave enough, by the way, just FYI. I'm trying to do what I can. So I try and be as helpful where I can be. If you're a founder and you typically get that, look, on behalf of all of my brothers and sisters in the CIO and IT leadership community, like we're just trying to get along, number one, and we're just trying to basically build things which are innovative, just like the startup community is. So we're going to have opinions. This is the way the world works. And those opinions are based on a bunch of data that we tend to receive when you're a CIO and you're basically surrounded by executive teams and you're surrounded by employees who are giving you feedback on stuff. So just remember that it's coming from a good place, number one. Number two, it's coming with good intention. If you're not building it, then be upfront about why you're not building it, and actually, but accept that that is a feedback loop that you've received versus a demand that needs to basically happen. If there's going to be a demand for something, it has to happen upfront, which basically says, well, do you have this feature inbuilt? This is table stakes for me because of my environment. And you're like, well, no, I'm not doing that, and here's why. Then that probably isn't a good fit. They have a mindset and they're very rigorous in terms of what they are, and they're not willing to make those changes. So you should move on and figure out a better customer. So in those situations, talk about the roadmap and the rigorous focus that you've basically built, the product, and how you've done that. I'm an advisor to a company like Productive, for example, which looks at SaaS sprawl, being able to organize that and put that in place. They've built it with data at the very heart of the product by being able to say, we need to give you visibility of everything that's going on, and we want to start from there. So they've built a foundation, and that has basically allowed for a conversation to happen with CIOs about what they therefore need, versus building a number of different features and seeing whether they work or not in it. So I think it's important to be able to just talk about foundation, roadmap, be reasonable about it, be thoughtful about it, but take it as a piece of feedback and be able to do that. People go through, the line of progress for a lot of these startups is not straight. It requires not necessarily pivots, but a little bit of changes in direction. Part of that will be driven by integrations. Part of that will be driven by market demand. Part of that will be driven by security. And part of that will be driven by a customer situation. And you as a founder of an enterprise company needs to make decisions about what is the best thing for you to be able to scale your business and to make it a product of value that everybody else is going to buy. So that's the way to kind of approach it from that standpoint.
That's really great. Let's go and talk a little bit about some of the areas. I think what we've seen a lot in the last 6 months is a lot of shifts in priorities for a lot of CIOs in big enterprises. And, we're already seeing it manifest itself in various industries. Some founders were already engaged, things changed on them. The priority, all of a sudden became a lot more revenue driven for the company versus innovation, and all of that. So talk to me about what changed in the landscape of CIOs in the last 6 months. What should founders know primarily about that, and how to appeal to that change in priority?
Right, absolutely. So before I go into too much group therapy about the last 6 months, because that's fundamentally what will basically end up happening, I'm going to try and be thoughtful about what's basically happened without revealing too much. And I mean that sincerely because, like I said, there's a lot that's happened with a lot of companies. I'll give you a general vantage point. Number one is prioritization of investments has happened. And I think that's one of the things that immediately comes to mind. So reprioritizing investments, nice versus necessary, is a question that people have typically had. Which are the products and customers that are going to be able to drive and output a particular solution, and then be able to make sure that that's of value. So there's prioritization that's gone. So the general aspect of prioritization, nice versus necessary. Second, there's been a focus towards being able to make sure that companies from an operating standpoint and from a customer experience standpoint are set and ready for what's clearly been the world turning a little bit upside down and entire industries being disrupted as a result of what's happened over the last 6 months. And by that, I basically mean projects which were potentially revenue generating, which were dependent on technology or cloud transformation, have now taken a bigger priority than before. And the reason for that is very, very simple. It's because now you actually have to think about transactions in a way which you didn't think about before. And it's going to be driven by software. It's going to be driven online, and it's going to be driven by your lack of ability to be able to interact with customers in a physical presence. Whether you're a retailer who needs to basically refactor their mobile app to figure out what drive-through and pick up curbside looks like, to being able to figure out how to optimize delivery, as well as to be able to figure out how you basically buy cars, for example, online. And so all of that has basically changed. And so prioritization of spend from the conversation that I've had are going to be about which of the products that are going to make sure that we are able to generate revenue are going to take a much bigger focus. And fundamentally, those are going to be filtered down into ones which our time to value is exceptionally high. Cybersecurity continues to be at the top of mind. I don't think that's going to be something that people are going to compromise on. But saying that, people are going to prioritize on things that are going to typically work. My viewpoint is very simple. My personal viewpoint based on conversations is I think the solutions that are going to work are going to be ones which are more prescriptive in nature, the ones that are typically much more, and this is the power of machine learning backed solutions, which are able to basically give a guide to either cybersecurity teams or IT teams about where they need to be able to prioritize their work, right? So efficiency of teams being driven by software is something where people are focused, because hiring, of course, has gone on hold for a lot of companies or being reprioritized in terms of where you want to be able to sell. So being able to make sure that those are done in an effective fashion, and those projects and solutions are going to be very, very key. I think the last thing is, from an organizational standpoint, there is a lot about team collaboration, not the use of solutions, but how you're able to basically enable a team to be able to do their best work when they are so widely distributed. You've got to figure out different ways to be. So yes, there are a number of trends and number of companies that are working specifically around solutions for remote and collaborative teams. That is a market momentum that was expected. But I think when you are building a solution, you need to think about the customer experience with that in mind. If you are deploying out what used to be a collective SOC in a physical environment, and now that is a completely virtual SOC with a collaborative team, how are you able to make sure that the user experience is best in class from my standpoint, right? And I do think that machine learning solutions like MoveWorks or others, Automation Anywhere, which are doing repetitive, like these are the things that add value, because what's happening is automated processes and automation. The reason it's taken off is because there's a hyper demand for that. If you think about call centers, for example, which had to deal with cancellations and re-reservation of bookings for airlines or hotels, you can't hire 500 people tomorrow to be able to deal with that process. You have to automate a large part of that. And so those are some of the examples that came across in my conversations, where thinking about autonomous processes being able to be resolved in the cybersecurity, in the IT stack, in business processes like contract order process or others, being able to do that more and more is probably critical. So yeah.
And I think, we talked about cybersecurity, kind of remote experience for collaboration, autonomous everything, automation. What other areas do you think, and I think this is something that is changing and shifting, but I think that, there's a lot of new trends because of COVID,
yes.
And where it puts us all, both as, consumers as well as, enterprises. What things you think will stick through even post vaccine when we get it, or, what are the things, what are the solutions that you think that founders right now building something, you think that will be areas that will continue to grow, that will continue to demand new innovation, that you as an investor now will be more excited about in terms of, seeing where, innovation can happen for enterprises?
Yeah, so at Ridge, one of the reasons I joined was just rigorous focus towards enterprise, and so as a result, the companies that we tend to basically see are so wide in variety when it comes to enterprise that for me, I have a great day every single day. It's fantastic meeting with founders and entrepreneurs every single day. But a large reason for that is because the way people are looking to address solutions in a couple of areas excite me about, basically gives me a signal about saying what the next level of transformation is going to happen. In some cases, it's in the vertical spaces. And so it's going to be a variety of everything from construction to facilities management and industrial asset management or built asset management. So companies like MaintainX in our portfolio do think about this, and they say, well, look, you've got a wide real estate portfolio. How are you able to basically make sure that you are maintaining it, optimizing it for cost and health and safety or other reasons? So that's in specific verticals where software is going to be driven. I think that's going to do well. I continue to be very bullish on cybersecurity. As much as I believe that it has grown exponentially as an industry, that I fundamentally believe the threat vectors have varied and have completely varied. So at Ridge, we look at everything from privacy, data compliance, and data security very effectively with companies both in our portfolio as well as companies that speak to us on a pretty regular basis. And so those areas, and the reason for that is very simple. So there are companies like In Country with Peter Yared backed, serial entrepreneur, but understood that the world is moving towards a much more regulated space from a data standpoint. And so building a solution like In Country allows for data residency as a core issue, right? And being able to sort of drive things along those lines. So data residency, data privacy, those are definitively things that I hear about on a pretty regular basis. I think the third is, yes, I see a lot of automation solutions being driven. I think this is a large part of two reasons for this. One is because I think people have looked at being able to do much more automated processes because of the last 6 months and the refactoring of companies. And I think the second is because this is the time. If you think about the compute, if you think about the data sets, and candidly speaking, the imagination that's now available for us to be able to tap into, I think those solutions are really making a substantial difference. Some of those you've invested in, and some of those that we've invested in and we look at very broadly, because I think automation is probably going to be a big part of it. And yeah, look, AI and ML is still very early. I think it's still developing over time. I think it's going to be about very specific focus in terms of the end result that you tend to basically get. So there's a lot happening in the AI ML space. There's another aspect to this, which is about the core infrastructure and the next generation of infrastructure, data, cloud or otherwise, that I think it's going to happen. People have focused a lot on data pipelines. They've focused on data streaming because the level of data that's being ingested by businesses is expanding and increasing at an exponential rate. And in order to be able to scale that, to be able to transact and process it, takes a tremendous amount of effort to do. And I think the old ways of doing that, candidly speaking, are not going to scale. And so there's a lot of work that's happening in the data infrastructure, AI infrastructure space that I continue to be very, very excited about. So fundamentally, I'm a monumental nerd, Shuly, and I will slightly apologize for that. But as you can see, I really like this stuff. So yeah.
I totally get it. I mean,
Yes.
I think that, as horrible as the situation that we're in right now with COVID and, the economy is unstable and things are, kind of being uncertain.
Yeah.
There is certain, I think, level of optimism I have in terms of the innovation side and where the opportunities are today that are really in our face with regards to what systems are broken, what's not working.
Well, one thing I would say, sorry to interrupt, Shuly, but it's really important that I want to just talk about that point. I'm sorry to interrupt. I forgot this thought. One of the key things that startups need to think about when they want to be able to engage with CIOs and CTOs, especially in light of the current situation, because we talked about it, because the world is kind of a little upside down, you need to be able to talk about your message more. And the problem is that as much as you can do LinkedIn invites, et cetera, but invest time in telling your story. And so if I could make a shout out to anyone, I'd say it'd be the product marketing community and the marketing community in general. Like, this is the time. I mean, think about the number of startups that are being created in different sectors and different segments. It is very, very crowded. So your objective to be able to get design partnerships is about mind share, especially in this day and age. I mean, think about where people are virtual. You can't meet with them. There's no fancy dinners happening. There's no EBCs happening from that standpoint. So if you want to get engaged with the CIO, think about the context of what you're providing in the world that we're living in and the solution you're talking about. So yes, whether it's a combination of webinars, whether it's a combination of white papers that you write, whether it's a bunch of research that you've done, whether it's videos that you're recording, this like go out and be able to talk about that more and more. Spend time and effort doing that, because being able to have a narrative for the industry is what people are going to get engaged about. People will meet you because of a relationship, because of a referral. They'll probably want to engage with you because you have a good track record. But fundamentally, they want to know you and your company's story. And so a lot of startups don't focus enough time on it. And I missed that earlier, but I wanted to be able to make sure I said that right now, because I don't think enough of that is done. So.
Yes, and I think, we spoke about it in the past, and then, there was, a whole session about go-to-market for enterprises where I think a lot of founders are waiting and staying kind of in stealth about their solutions and what they're thinking and what they're building too long. And
Yeah,
so I
far too
think
long.
that, what this situation forces a lot of founders is to think about marketing. They would have to do it, both to generate the pipeline that they need to generate, virtually versus face to face, and definitely the messaging, which we know is super important right now to
Yeah,
do.
I mean, when you start saying to CIO to say I'm a stealth startup, and you're kind of out of stealth. I mean, with respect, right? I mean, yes, it's a private audience, but I guess my point is, don't spend too much time on that. Be thoughtful about what you want to do. And I think the other thing I would say is, think about what your coming out of stealth plan looks like. Very, very few companies have done this really well. I think MoveWorks partnered with a company called Emotive Brand. I've worked with a bunch of companies. Material Security, for example, came out earlier this year. Coming out of stealth is really, really important. That requires you to have a number of customer stories in place, your branding, your website. Those are just marketing collateral, but it's actually about being enterprise ready from a product standpoint, such that you can say, hey, this is a company that I want to actually do business with. I think that's, people don't spend enough time on it. That's a big part of the story. And I think they need to be able to tell their story early and be able to plant many seeds along the way. I think that's really, really important as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I know you are, you've spent some time being an advisor to some early stage companies, and thinking about as a early stage founder, an early stage team, building credibility out there, building credibility in the ecosystem that you are going after, your sector, your vertical. Oftentimes is who else is joining from the industry as an advisor. And, I know we talk constantly to our founders about looking at that option in order to get more credibility, more social proof for you, open doors to, various enterprises. How should founders think about building an advisory team?
So, heads up, I'm actually writing a bunch of content on this, so happy to share that and in the next few weeks. But it is a process. I've been on the customer advisory board for a bunch of companies. I've been on the advisory board for a bunch of companies. I've been an informal advisor to hundreds of companies. I've been an formal advisor to very few companies. So, first of all, I would actively encourage people to be able to, startups to be able to do this. But you've got to structure it. And I think that's very important. And by structure, you basically mean what the expectation is, number one. It doesn't have to be a time commitment thing. There's a level of trust that goes into it. The fact that somebody is even willing to spend time to be able to consider this is important for them to be able to go in. Second of all, it's really important to be able to think about where the value add is. If you actually want advice, then have an advisor. If you just want some feedback, that's not an advisory role. Think about that. The advisory relationship is one which is longer term. It requires a number of feedback loops. It requires guidance and coaching, and be thoughtful about how you basically do that. That's in the early stages. So that's one aspect of it. But if you want feedback and guidance, hey, get one advisor and say, look, I really need to get some intros to others, either to customers or to be able to refine and be able to make sure I get a sense of feedback loop. I think that's super important. I think the second thing that I would say is, and so, at Ridge, we have a very established CISO network. I mean, I was part of it for several years. And that basically was very encouraging to me, is because I think what I tend to see is you have people who are part of that network who are actively engaged and want to be engaging with startups. And what it told me was that because they came from multiple geographies and different industries, most people would like to take either a board seat, independent at a startup, or they want to hold an advisory board role. And I think the harsh reality is there's no actual template for it, which is why I'm taking the time to actually put something together. So the
Yes.
reason is you have to kind of set what the expectations are. The expectations for me are very simple. Number one is think about giving product feedback and making time to do that. Maybe it's once a quarter. Second, probably look to try and do some customer intros. Three, be a customer advocate or be an advocate for the company to be able to give assurance to say, hey, look, I'm a tried and tested CIO or a CISO. I've worked with this company. I'm not a customer, but I believe in their vision. I believe what they're doing is really important. You should definitely talk to them. Credibility is important. I think the fourth thing is, yes, when you're talking to investors and when you're building up, being able to make sure they're able to tell that story is really important. Most companies fail at being able to engage their advisors actively by being able to make sure that they share the information and be able to reach out for help. That's the whole reason they call advice. They're happy to give advice. You don't have to take every % of it and do it, but it's important to be able to get different vantage points and get diversity of opinion. So yes.
Yeah, that's really a great suggestion. I don't think we have any more questions from the audience. So I just wanted to ask you, Yousuf, if there's anything else you want to share with us and with, kind of the early stage founders who are joining us, from everywhere in the world right now and thinking about, their go-to-market.
Yeah. Look, I think I would say a couple of things. I said, first and foremost, keep going. Okay. It's, this is a journey. It's hard and it will take some time. It's going to be frustrating. It'll be character building at the same time. It's going to be a lot of fun, but you've got to be able to figure out how you go about it. But if you fundamentally believe you're building a company of meaningful value, if you think that you are going to basically positively impact an industry or a customer or a set of customers, then you should fundamentally keep going. So that's my general advice. I'm an advocate and fan and friend of founders and entrepreneurs in early stage companies. Number two, think about what the right early customers are first and foremost. And by that, I mean, just take a little bit of a step back and say, I would like that CIO to represent my customer story when I come out of stealth, for example. Think about the fact that that is a team that you wish to engage with early on and that do you think they want to engage with you? Being able to identify that, spend time doing that. Three, get lots and lots of feedback. There's no denying you're monumentally smart. I'm not, I get it. But what I would strongly advise is go through a feedback cycle over time. There's a balance. You don't want to go overboard, but try and be relevant from that standpoint. Four, please focus on building your story. I understand you want to build a great product. I understand you want to basically hire engineers. No one's telling you not to do that. But it's of zero value if you are not able to easily articulate this and be able to drive that message throughout the industry, because you're competing for mind share, and that's really, really important. And fifth, be nice to Shuly. Like, she's great. She's work with her. She's fantastic. Work with me. I'm a pretty good guy. I'm learning from her half the time. But we're a good bunch of people. And so I'd be more than happy to do that. I have no idea why I came with that last point, but I'm being sincere. Hey, I'd love to be able to do that.
Thanks. So yes, we're enjoying working together, and I'm grateful for that, and continuing to champion early stage founders and working with them on figuring out their path. I think that's what we're on a mission for. So with that, thank you so much, Yousuf. I really enjoyed this session. I think we're going to have a recording of it, and then also we're summarizing kind of the key points that we will be able to then share on our blog and have you guys out there keep it for yourself. So thank you again.
Thank you. And thank you to Google for Startups and the whole UpWest team. You've done a phenomenal job. I appreciate you inviting me today.
And we're looking forward to our next session. Stay tuned. Thanks, Yousuf.
Bye-bye.
Bye.